that a young boy in Chicago of 10 years old was struck by a car and didn't make it. His full name is, you should have an Aliyah, Shmuel Herschel ben Shammai Shemaya. May the Rabbeinu Shalom give the family Nechama, may we see no more Tsar, Chas v'Shalom, Am Yisrael.
Amen. So good morning, ladies. Today, I think what we're going to do is we're going to focus on our avoda this Sunday, Tisha B'Av. I'm not going to talk about all the averas that brought us here. I think we all know it. We all know what needs to be corrected, fixed, all that stuff. Really, it's to focus on what our job is. So there is a story that the Maggid of Dubna tells over, and there's a couple, and they get married, and it's many years, and they don't have children. And she's finally pregnant, and it's time to have her child, and she goes into labor, and the doctor comes out, and he says to the husband, "Your wife and baby are both in danger. I can only save one. You have to tell me which one." So he goes and discusses it with his wife, and the wife said, "It only makes sense. You need to save the baby, because what's the point in life if you don't have anyone to transmit and to continue the chain?" And that's exactly what happened. And the day that this baby was born, the mother dies. And every part of this boy's simcha was a reminder of her death. 8 days later, when they got up 7 days from Shiva, it was his bris. 30 days later, it was his pidyon haben, but it was the shleishim. Every birthday was her yurtzeit. Anyways, he turns 13, and the father says to him, "Okay, now you're a big boy. You've heard about your mother all these years and everything she's done for you and sacrificed for you. Now it's time for you to go into the shul and say Kaddish." The boy gets dressed, he puts on his suit and his hat and everything else, or no hat, depends on who he belongs to. And he goes into the shul, he gets an aliyah, he says his Kaddish, and then he leaves. The father was shocked. And he said the Kaddish fast, and he walks out. He says, I don't understand. What was that all about? We waited all these years. Your mother gave her life for you. I told you everything about her, and this is what you do? You come into the shul, you say your Kaddish as fast as you can, and you walk out? So he turns to him and he says, yes, my father, because I don't know my mother. I never knew my mother. I only know the stories that you tell me. So it means nothing to me. The father gets on the floor and he cries and he sobs uncontrollably. The Maggid says that that's who we are. Comes Tisha B'Av, we go in, we say our kinnis, and we walk away. Because we don't know. We were never there. We never met the Shechina in the Beit Hamikdash. We never felt the presence of the Shechina in the Beit Hamikdash. We have no idea what we are crying for. We have no idea what we're yearning for. And that's what we need to focus on today. What are we crying about? What are we yearning for? What is missing? Yes, we can look around and we can cry for everything that is the result of the Churban. Rav Gamliel heard a woman crying at night. And he went to her house and he sat next to her and he cried and he cried and cried until the eyelashes fell out. They asked him, well, what was that about? You don't even know what she was crying about. He said, it doesn't matter. Whatever suffering she's going through, I know it's the result of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, so I am crying with her. So what is it? What is it? We can't be blamed We can't be blamed. The little boy couldn't be blamed. Where does it all stem from? What's the root? And where does it take us? And that's what we're going to do today. So the shorish, the root of the cries, is from the time that the Meraglim came back and told the Jews everything they did and saw. And the pasuk says over there, Tisha Kol Chai, they lifted up their voices and they cried. And it wasn't a regular cry. It was a guttural cry. Rav Soloveitchik discusses the difference between a bechia and a hesped. The bechia is a guttural, despair cry with no rationale. It comes from the gut. No hope. The cry of a hesped is a little more rational. Kadosh Baruch Hu looks at them and he says, what? Are you kidding me? You're crying? I will give you something to cry about. But that also puts a big question mark in our heads. What? You would do that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You're telling us that you're going to give us something to cry about because of the kind of cry that we cried then? A cry for nothing? A cry of despair, of losing hope? A cry of anguish? So what is that? So what is that? So we have to understand, Rav Shimshon Pinka says, the chiyuv of this day is to cry. Pesach, we eat matzah. Sukkot, we sit in a sukkah. Tisha B'Av, we cry. And with those tears, we are going to be able to build the Beit Hamikdash. Because there are different kinds of tears. They're not the kind of tears that the Jews cried in the Midbar. When Bas Paro heard the cry of Moshe, she understood that that cry was the cry of a Jew. Because a cry of a Jew is not a cry of despair. It's not a cry of anguish. It's not that. It's cries of hope. On Tisha B'Av, we fast because we put our lives on hold. But we also cry in order to build the Beit Hamikdash. What was Hashem saying? Hashem was saying there will be a day when destruction is going to take place and you're going to cry. But your cries will be cries of hope, longing, and yearning. Your cries will have the ability to build. Because you see, my children, you are builders. And your mission is to build and to bring the Shekhinah into this world, to reveal the glory of Hashem. And that will only come through the destruction. Because unfortunately, through destruction, you will realize what you lost. And when you see the loss, you will begin to cry. And the yearning and all of that will come to the surface. Because wedded in Avelus is optimism. When we plant, we usually plant in the bottom when it's dark, underground. And in that darkness comes the little sprouts, seed by seed. And it gets watered. And it gets watered by our tears. Chashach is created first. Esav and Yishmael was created first. It says, Breishis bar Elokim es haaretz, Shemayim ves haaretz, va'aretz ha'sasov v'vo v'choshech al pnei saham. There was complete darkness, but Ruach Elokim Ruach Efes. But God hovers over. Embedded in the destruction is the optimism. When we say Hamakom Yunachem of Eschem Besoch Shar Tzion of Lev Shalayim, what are we telling the person who's sitting Shiva? We're saying the reason we're all crying is because we understand that your tsar is really emanating from the Churban. The Churban, everything that's happening to us is a result of the Churban. Where do our cries come from? Where does it come from? The cries, the tears, or the sweat of the soul. They come from our soul. From deep within, they are in our souls. What is Golus? Golus is when that neshama recedes. And when the neshama recedes, the Shechina recedes. The Shechina never actually recedes. Kavod Hashem never actually gets smaller. We become constricted. We become smaller vessels. Very difficult to pour a liquid in a tiny little bottle. Very difficult. In a little opening. It diminishes because our pnimius diminished. It gets smaller and smaller, and it's hard to accept the Shefa of Hashem. But when we cry, we begin to expand. We begin to open up that heart, which is so closed, that little opening of that bottle. The tears are the catalyst. It brings up the neshama, and it causes the Shechina to become greater again. The gates of our tears are never locked. Rav Yaakov Lando says that you have to imagine a cup that's filled to the top. A slight tap, and everything could spill out. On Tisha B'Av, our cries can do the same thing. Our cries can tip over the cup of bracha and shefa that a Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to give us, and it could actually pour it all over us. But first, we have to open up our souls. First, we have to become vessels. First, we have to understand why we are crying. Plato asked Yirmiyahu, what's wrong with your people? Why do you cry over stones and bricks? And why are you crying over the past? And what does he answer? He says, the stones and the bricks, those were the source of our wisdom and intellect. And we're not crying over the past. We're crying because we know that our tears will build the future. They are the building blocks. But in order to be able to cry cries of yearning and longing and hope, we have to know what we were crying about. The Gemara tells us, Kol hamisabel al Yushalayim zoche v'ro'eh b'simchasa. Whoever mourns for Yerushalayim in the right way is zoche v'ro'eh. He merits seeing it in its simcha. If you notice, the word is in presence. Ro'eh v'zoche. We also know the same thing in the bracha and Shemona Esrei. It says, Boneh Yerushalayim. It doesn't say when it will be built. It's saying it's being built. Hamachzir Shchinato l'Tzion. We say it now. On Tisha B'Av, we're going to say Menachem Tzion Uboneh Yerushalayim. What's going on? Why is it in the present? What does that mean to us? There's a beautiful story in the Medrash Eicha and the Medrash Zuta. And it's about a Jew, a lone Jew, who's in the Arabian desert. And he has a cow. And he's doing his business, and he can't wait to get back to Yerushalayim. And all he thinks about is the Beit Hamikdash, and we can't wait to get there and to bring his family there. And he's in the desert, and all of a sudden his cow goes crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Falls to the ground, screaming, yelling, kicking, and he mamish doesn't know what's going on. And all of a sudden, an Arabian, an Arab person appears, and he says, your cow is crying because your home, your Beit Hamikdash, is now being destroyed. And the Jew gets to the floor and he cries and he sobs uncontrollably, oh my gosh, woe to me. And in a split second, what happens? The cow gets up, and all of a sudden he's kicking his feet and he's making crazy sounds, and he looks as if he is dancing. And the Jew thinks to himself, oh my gosh, this cow is nuts. And again, this Arab appears and he says to him, your Redeemer has just been born. And the Redeemer was the Mashiach, and his name was Menachem. because we see that in the moment of destruction, there is redemption. And it's happening right now. Bone, zoche, roe. It's being built up there in the Shemayim. It's just a matter if we are zoche or not. Zoche comes from the word zach, to purify. We need to make ourselves into vessels where we'll be able to accept it and to open up our hearts and souls to see it. Like the seed that sits in the ground and it's ready to sprout. And what is going to make it sprout? Our tears. Every single tefillah in Shemona Esrei corresponds to another month. The month of Av is the tefillah of Tzemach David. Tzemach was another name of Mashiach. A sprout takes time. It requires constant watering. The Tzemach David is watered through our tears. Rav Schwab said that the tears that he shed while saying these tefillos, Bona Yerushalayim, and at Tzemach David, is what is going to bring the Tzemach David. That's the Bona, and that's the Zocher. The Bona and the Zocher are in the present to show us that we have the ability to build it now. But what am I actually crying about? I was never there. What am I missing? What am I lacking? So in order to understand that, we have to talk a little bit about the Beit Hamikdash, about the miracles that occurred in the Beit Hamikdash, about the people who actually experienced what it felt like in the Beit Hamikdash. In Parshas Vayetze, the Torah relates the story of Yaakov Avinu meeting Rachel. And Rachel's at the well. Yaakov rolls over the stone and he gives her the water. And in relating the story, the Torah talks about three herds of sheep waiting to drink from the well. The Ramban is a little bit perplexed and he wonders, why does the Torah have to tell us that? Because there's nothing empty in the Torah. The Torah is trying to tell us something. The Ramban says this alludes to something much deeper that's going to happen in hundreds and hundreds of years later. The well represents the Beit Hamikdash, where Bnei Israel would drink the holy water, which is the Ruach HaKodesh. The sheep represents Klal Yisrael, who are loyal. They follow their shepherd. The three flocks correspond to the three times that the Yidden went up, fulfilling the commandment. But why is the Beit Hamikdash represented as a well? Because when a Jew went there, it was his Mayim Chayim. You see how we all are plutzing when we look at the picture of the Kaisel? We're all begging, we're dying to get that injection of that chiyus. It was where that Jew got his life. It was where his thirst was quenched. And when he left, he was a different person and he couldn't wait to get back. And all he would say is, Tzama nafshi, tzama lecha nafshi. I'm so thirsty for you, Hashem. I want to go back. It was like a Rebbe's tish sitting around this table. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu was at the head. There's a story that's told of this Rasha. And his name was Yosef Meshisa. And Yosef Meshisa was a horrific Rasha. And what happened is that the Romans themselves were afraid to go in to the Beit Hamikdash. And they asked him to bring out everything. They wanted to see it. They told him, though, not to touch the menorah. I don't know why. And he ends up going in and he brings out the menorah. And they were appalled. They couldn't believe it. Like, wow. So they said, okay, go back in and bring us this and this and this. And all of a sudden he refused. Couldn't understand why you're refusing. And he refused and he refused and he was adamant, I'm not going back in, I'm not going back in. And he died a painful death. And while he was dying, he did tshuva. And he said, to woe to me. He says, I angered my master. What happened to him? So the Meforshim tell us that the minute he walked in, he was transformed. He walked in, he was transformed. Something happened to him that when he came back out, he knew that he was a different person and he couldn't walk back in and do something that was so horrific. There were many, many miracles that occurred. and many miracles, and you can see it in Pirkei Avos, Perek Hey. And these miracles were really not just miracles, but they actually injected in the people this awareness of who they were. They tell us that the Yidden would leave, they'd leave their doors open. Nobody was afraid that anybody would steal. Usually the rest of the year people would steal, but there was like these images of the people that lived there, so the neighbors were afraid to go into the homes. Chicken coops were never destroyed by cats because the snakes would eat the cats. And they tell us certain miracles that happened in this Beit Hamikdash. The Ner Tamid never, ever died out. And when they saw that and they stood there, they understood that their little Ner Tamid inside themselves will never be extinguished. They saw that the flies never, never touched the meat. There was never a fly. There was never a fly. And they understood what the fly represented. The fly is symbolic of the little Yetzer Hara that can get through that little hole. They understood now that they had power over the Yetzer Hara. They felt emboldened. A fly is a carrier. And we also are carriers. They understood that they don't want to be carriers. They don't want to be Lashon Hara people and tell and gossip. It empowered them. It changed them. They saw that pregnant women never miscarried. They saw that the fire never went out. They saw that the rains never put the fires out and understood what that meant for them. The fire is their passion. The Geshem comes from the word physical, Gashmias. They understood that their Torah had the ability to quench their Gashmias, that their Gashmias did not have the ability to quench their Torah. They saw that the smoke of the Korbanos went straight up. The winds never blew it to any side. When they saw that, they were in awe. And they understood that any wind of deviation, if they put their heart and their mind and their soul to it, would never, they had the ability to be able to direct everything up to Hashem. Every part of the avoda in the Beit Hamikdash was there to unify. Amazing. Me'ached. Everything. Why? Because we learned it last week. The Kohanim did what they did. The Leviim did what they did. Yisrael did what they did. Everybody had their tafkid. Everybody had their tafkid. And everybody was shalem with themselves, shalem with their friends, and shalem with their creator. To the point that there were so many people in that Beit Hamikdash, there was nowhere to stand. And yet, Hayutzefufim, they began to float. There was room for everybody. And when they got onto the floor and they began to do tshuva, they all had their own Dalet Amos, and nobody was able to hear what they were saying to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And when the Yiddim looked at that, they said, that was their ability for making room for others. Never saying that you don't have a place next to me, or you cannot stand next to me because there is no place. This is what they saw. This is what they experienced. This is what we cry for. We cry about our loss. We cry about the fact that the Churban, all our losses is the result of that Churban. That's what we cry about. And our tears are yearning. There's a story that I found. Again, the Dubner Magid relates a mashal, and he explains what happens when we become so far removed. The father and the son, they leave Yerushalayim, and the father and the son, and they're crying bitterly. Father, Father, what's going to happen? Asked the boy. Be strong, my son, be strong. We're going to return shortly. You're going to see. We are going into exile now, but we're soon going to come home. But Father, I can't go on without the Beis Hamikdash. We must return to Yerushalayim. A few years later, the son told his father, you know, exile was not so bad. People here have all types of delicious ice cream and candies. And look, they have the coolest gadgets. Suddenly, the father fell to the floor, crying as he had never cried before. Father, why are you crying? My son, as long as you cried over the Mikdash, I felt comforted. I felt strong. You were still connected to the Ribono Shel Olam. There was hope for the future. Gadgets? Candies? Ice cream? That's what you care about? Samalacha nafshi. Tisha B'Av is a time to cry, to direct our cries to what is worth crying about, to push away the stones that are covering our hearts. Each one of us has to do our own share in building, learning, davening, with passion, with fire, being one with the Torah, staying in the structure that we talked about last week, being lasok b'divrei Torah, yached levavenu. The Chassam Sofer tells over that he would cry and cry, or someone told over on the Chassam Sofer on Erev Tisha B'Av with a cup in his hand until it filled up and it poured over at the sides. Ad shenitz maleh, it says. And he took this cup that was overflowing with his tears, and the Sudas HaMafsekes, he dipped his beard into the tears. What is yearning? Yearning is when you go to a simcha and you see at this beautiful, wonderful simcha that someone is missing. God forbid, a child, a spouse, a parent. Yearning, it was when you know that something is missing. Someone tells over a story that he attended a wedding of a wonderful bacher. Big Talmid Chacham, beautiful family, everything, gorgeous chasana, everything was so beautiful. But this chassan lost his father a few years back. At the end of the chassan goes into his room to get his stuff ready. And this Rav walks in afterwards to try to help him out since there's no father. And as soon as the door closes, the chassan puts his arms around him. He crumples and sobs uncontrollably. The Rav says, I understood. The event was magnificent, but something was missing. And that meant that everything was missing. The time and the place to yearn for Mashiach is exactly when we have everything, when everything is at its best. We have Torah, we have Gedula, everything and everybody is in attendance at our simchas. But there is a void. And if we look around, there is something that is missing. He's not here. His presence is not felt. Our home is not here. I'm going to end by reading you a tefillah that we say every single day. And I'm going to read it to you in English because you're going to see what we're really yearning for. It's the tefillah of Aleinu, but it's the second part. Listen to it. When you daven later, you're going to see how it's going to make a big difference. We put our hope in you that we may soon see your mighty splendor to remove detestable avodah zarah from the earth. False gods will be utterly cut off to perfect the universe through the Almighty's rule. Then all humanity will call upon your name to turn all the earth's wicked towards you. All the world's people will recognize and know that to you every knee should bend, every tongue should swear. Before you, Hashem our God, they will bend every knee and cast themselves down, and to the glory of your name they will render homage, and they will accept upon themselves the yoke of your kingship, that you may reign over them soon, eternally. The kingdom is yours. You will reign for eternity in glory, as it is written in your Torah. Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch, Le'olam ve'ed. V'ne'emar, v'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. Hashem will be king over all the world. Bayom ahu, on that day, yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. Everybody should have a meaningful fast. Easy, it's not going to be. But easy doesn't mean, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not meaningful. A meaningful fast. You should be able to cry. You should be able to yearn. And your tears should be the building blocks of the Beit Hamikdash. Mirz Hashem, through our tears, the tears of Nashim Tzidkanios, the Kadosh Baruch Hu open up those gates. Listen to our tears. May we become vessels to open up that little opening in that bottle, to be able to accept His Shefa. Be'ezras Hashem, not in Mirz Hashem. May we all be together, Bias HaMashiach, by the Beit Hamikdash, in that wonderful place, Yerushalayim,